Welcome to day 2 of the Summit of the Future Action Days. Yes! I love the energy already. Loving the energy. My name is Folie Batibo, a journalist and global champion for Education Cannot Wait, the United Nations Education Fund for Emergencies and Protracted Crises. I'm thrilled to be your host this morning as we gather here in New York to reimagine how we can all work together to address the opportunities and challenges of our time. Now, on day 1 of the Action Days Friday, we saw what meaningful youth engagement looks like in practice in shaping our common future. We heard from youth leaders about the importance of cross-generational collaboration to create lasting solutions on crucial issues like climate change, gender equity, and women and girls empowerment. We'll hear more about their recommendations from the Youth Rapporteur, who will be joining us on stage in just a few moments. In today's sessions, we are bringing together a broad and diverse set of global leaders and actors from all across sectors. They'll share their ideas and experiences on how to advance on critical themes, including digital and technology, peace and security, and sustainable development and financing. In addition to those themes, we'll have a dedicated focus throughout the day on future generations. Throughout this opening ceremony, ladies and gentlemen, we'll also have a visual scribe working in the background to create a visual summary of this session so you won't miss anything at the end of the day. But first, to open this exciting day, it's my pleasure and honor to welcome the United Nations Secretary General, His Excellency António Guterres.
Excellencies, dear friends, all protocol observed. Welcome to the Summit of the Future Action Days, which kicked off yesterday with the youth-led afternoon. A day full of ideas, energy, hope and expectation, and a perfect reminder of why we are here. Today promises to be just as dynamic. Looking out, I see world leaders, I see mayors and legislators, I see civil society, the private sector, academics, artists, activists, and young people. You come from every corner of the world, every generation, and every walk of life. Friends, this is what effective, inclusive, networked multilateralism must look like. 4 years ago, we began the process that brings us here today. And because we saw a world in trouble, torn apart by conflict and inequalities, threatened by climate chaos and unregulated technologies, with the Sustainable Development Goals in peril, with many countries now mired in disastrous debt and the cost of living crisis. We saw our multilateral institutions ailing, unable to respond to contemporary challenges, let alone those of tomorrow. We saw faith in multilateral solutions eroding, and we saw trust in each other dissipating just when we needed it most. So we began a journey to reform, to renew the international system, so that it meets the moment and is fit for the future. We need multilateralism that is more inclusive, more effective, and more networked, with stronger links between international institutions and with the people. That means greater representation of developing countries. And it means a stronger voice for all of you and what you represent. This ambition was rooted in some clear truth. The world belongs to us all. People want a say in the decisions that affect them. And while governments have primary responsibility that we do not deny, we will not solve today's global problems without contributions from all of society, from civil society and young people, delivering change, promoting accountability, demanding better standing up for truth and justice, and using new technologies to organize for a better world. From business and finance, critical to combating the climate crisis and shaping our digital future for the benefit of all. From scientists, innovators, and academics, pushing the boundaries of our knowledge and developing solutions to the great challenges that we face, from hunger and disease to online aid. Dear friends, over the past 4 years, the people in this room and your colleagues around the world participated in the most consultative process ever undertaken by the United Nations. We have seen a total of 1.5 million people from every one of our member states involved in discussions and consultations everywhere. Hundreds of civil society groups inputting into the Pact for the Future, the Global Digital Compact, and the Declaration on Future Generations, and thousands of written contributions. Together, you have pushed for vision and ambition, and I thank you for that. We have now 3 milestone texts that are on the table, which must open the door to changes our world in a way that it desperately needs. The Pact for the Future must lay the ground for reform. Reform of the outdated United Nations Security Council to make it more effective, but also more representative of what the world is today. Reform of our international financial institutions so that they supercharge resources for sustainable development and for climate action. Reforms of the rules governing outer space, currently a chaotic free-for-all, and reform how we respond to complex global shocks and work together on peace and security. On the other hand, the Global Digital Compact must be a blueprint for closing digital divides and the first universal agreement on artificial intelligence, laying the foundations for a global platform centered at the UN that can bring all actors together. The Declaration on Future Generations must commit leaders to take tomorrow into account as they make decisions today. And gender equality and human rights must weave through every aspect of those texts, reflecting the fact that they are fundamental to every area of life.
Excellencies, friends. The issues at the heart of these texts, justice, rights, peace, and equality, have animated my work for decades, driving me forward. I know the same is true for many of you. I will not give up, and I know that you won't either. The adoption of these texts will not be the end of the journey. It will simply be a new beginning. Our next task is to breathe life into these texts, to put words into action, and to use them to set humanity on a better course. Your continued engagement, commitment, and pressure will be vital. That work starts with these action days. We look forward to hearing your ideas and solutions on what these new frameworks mean for you and how, together, you can help to make them a reality. A renewed multilateralism will not be built in a day or by governments alone. It will be fueled and carried forward by all of you and the groups that you represent. We have fought for ambition. Now, let's fight for action together. On behalf of the United Nations, thank you for joining us in this vital task.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Secrétaire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, for your engagement.
Once again, please, for the United Nations Secretary General. for his inspiring words on the vital importance of international collaboration and cooperation in addressing the challenges that we face. Now, our next speakers exemplify the essence of international collaboration. There are currently multiple astronauts in space, and we have the privilege to hear from some of them. The crews on board the International Space Station and the Tiangong Space Station orbiting above us are quite literally showing us that global teamwork knows no bounds. Cosmonauts of the Russian Federation on the ISS are currently changing shifts. As you'll appreciate, their safety is of paramount importance. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now take a giant leap, well, a virtual one at least, into space, with this message from astronauts on the International Space Station and the Tiangong Space Station. Take a look.
Greetings from the International Space Station. I'm NASA astronaut Matthew Dominic with my crewmate Jeanette Epps. International cooperation and collaboration in space are just as critical to our work aboard this international research lab as it is back on Earth.
On the ISS, we do research in microgravity that is not possible on Earth. From our unique vantage point in space, we can better understand our changing planet. NASA's Earth Science mission, many implemented with our partnerships around the world, are helping decision makers improve life on Earth, safeguard our future, and help us discover and innovate for the benefit of all.
As you gather this week for the UN General Assembly, we encourage all nations to help assure peaceful, safe, and sustainable space exploration for the benefit of humankind.
We greet everyone from China Space Station. The peaceful use of outer space is a common goal of humanity. In the Summit of the Future, countries will jointly explore important issues such as multilateralism and international cooperation in the field of space under the framework of the UN, which will have significant impact on global governance of the outer space. We feel honored to participate in it. China has always adhered to the peaceful use of outer space. The China Space Station, a landmark project of China's space industry, officially entered a new stage of application and development in 2023 after 2 years of on-orbit assembly and construction. The China Space Station belongs not only to China but also to the world. As early as 2019, the Chinese government opened the utilization resources of China's space station to other countries to ensure that more countries could participate in manned space technology and application research, which was a strong support to the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We are willing to continue to conduct space exchange and cooperation with other countries and actively promote building a community with a shared future for mankind in the field of outer space based on equality, mutual benefit, peaceful use, and inclusive development. We wish the UN Summit of the Future a complete success. Thank you.
Isn't that just amazing? Amazing. Thank you to the incredible astronauts on board the ISS and the Tiangong Space Station for that out-of-this-world message, as you saw. Only at the UN can you see such great things, right? Their vantage point reminds us that while we may be separated by vast distances, our shared challenges and aspirations unite us all. So thank you once again to the astronauts. Now let's bring our focus back on Earth and turn our attention to two remarkable leaders who are driving positive change within our communities. They've both been instrumental in organizing and facilitating consultations with civil society in the lead-up to the Summit of the Future Action Days. First, we're going to hear from Ms. Carol Osero Agengo, who was one of the co-chairs of the UN Civil Society Conference that took place in May in Nairobi. Please give a warm welcome to Carol.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, As we reflect on the 69th Civil Society Conference, the first in the Global South, and which was in support of the Summit of the Future, 3 points stand out: connection, convening, and collaboration in an intersectional and intergenerational world before, during, and after the conference. Excellencies, the 9-week collaboration in planning the conference was a collaborative endeavor, showing the strength and the diversity of civil society and the broad issues of interests of civil society, which we learned we must bring together at all possible junctures, because we do not engage with these issues one to the exclusion of another. My co-chair Nudara Yusuf and I, in framing the objectives of inclusion, impact, and innovation, asked ourselves, how do we drive impact? How do we catalyze change? Excellencies, in the run-up to the conference, unprecedented rains and resultant floods in Nairobi did not spare the United Nations campus where we were to hold the conference, but it united civil society in support of the victims of the floods in Nairobi, showing the spirit of collaboration and partnership that sits at the foundation of civil society. The outcome package of the conference is now available on the conference website, detailing 2 days of workshops and Impact Coalition engagements. The Impact Coalitions covered broad issues ranging from development, financing for development, AI governance, future generations. The Impact Coalitions bring together civil society, academia, think tanks, member states, and other stakeholders for action-oriented inputs into the summit. The civil society continues to lean into the diversity that defines us, even as we seek to build common ground and move ahead to advance the ambitions of the millions of people around the world who benefit from our actions. We do not always agree, and that is fine. That is diversity. The coming days will see civil society input tap into the existing stakeholder collaboration platforms that work together to put the conference, including the major groups and other stakeholders, Coalition for the UN We Need, GNEC, and Congo, to engage in the key reform issues contained in the pact. We, however, seek and will continue to seek greater opportunity for civil society in the UN processes. Excellencies, it is also time to reframe the narrative on aging from a challenge to an opportunity, and we saw this in the intergenerational activities yesterday. Prospective aging of the youth of today calls for envisioning of young people here today as older people of the future, a future consisting also of other young people. The prospect shifts the definition of who is old as life expectancy increases to recognize the many older adults today who are engaged and productive and bring valuable contributions to society. We must recognize and protect their fundamental rights, but we can also harness the knowledge, experience, and innovation of this growing population segment as a resource for future generations. And we are also interconnected and interdependent in our families, communities, and societies, and globally. So we need to seek solutions that work for all of us. I thank you very much.
Carol, thank you very much for your remarks. Thank you for your contributions to this Summit of the Future. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Olli Henman, who's one of the co-chairs of the coordination mechanism of major groups and other stakeholders. Olli, welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. It's a great honor to speak here today as we face the future together. My name is Olli Henman, and together with Rashima Quatra, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Major Groups and Other Stakeholders Coordination Mechanism. This mechanism has been working together since the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 and is recognized under mandate by the General Assembly. Its 21 constituencies are thematic and regional in nature, and these constituencies represent millions of diverse people from around the world. We have engaged over many months in dialogue with the co-facilitators of the key documents of the Summit for the Future, and we are grateful for this regular engagement, including at the Nairobi CSO conference. Over these action days, we're witnessing the energy and dynamism of civil society, the collaboration with a wide range of partners and fresh ideas from so many diverse groups. We are glad to be here together during the action days, but our voice must also be heard at the summit itself. We cannot be excluded from the opportunity to shape our common future and insist on meaningful inclusion in all UN processes. In terms of the Pact for the Future and what comes next, we have some key insights based on our shared positions, and I'm glad that many other colleagues are here to share their views over these days as well. Firstly, the Pact must demonstrate the UN's values to champion a democratic and rights-based multilateral system, ensuring meaningful participation of all stakeholders. We appreciate the mention of ECOSOC-accredited NGOs and also the specific call for meaningful inclusion of relevant stakeholders. However, we're concerned at attempts to create additional barriers for accreditation. And while we called for greater collaboration with civil society, unfortunately we do not see that in the revised text. We welcome the continued dialogue with member states, and we commit to engage with a wide range of delegations going forward to ensure a strong exchange of ideas. Secondly, on human rights, we're very glad to see a recommitment to shared principles on the universality of rights. Everyone's rights must be guaranteed. While in recent years we have witnessed populism and inflammatory language from some political leaders, which has led to an us and them culture, erosion of rights, and the rollback of hard-fought equalities, massive violations in situations of conflict. In order to guarantee these rights, the UN's own structures for protection and enhancement of rights must be strengthened. We call for accelerating support for the human rights pillar of the UN and forging clearer links at the country level with resident coordinator teams. Thirdly, we're pleased to see renewed commitment for financing to deliver real change. It is essential that adequate financing is agreed to deliver the SDGs, and in particular, we're glad to see the reference to targeting programs to support those who are being left behind. We believe the Pact provides one step along the way, and note that crucial discussions for financing will be taking place next year at the Financing for Development Forum. Fourthly, it is essential that this Pact sets out a renewed vision that is built on equity, fairness, and trust. We must step back from the brink of catastrophic wars and conflict and instead direct our energy and resources to a reinvestment in social protection. We therefore look forward to the World Social Summit in 2025 as a key moment to reset priorities and ensure recommitment to people-centered development, accessible and affordable public services, and social protection for all. Finally, the Pact's recognition of the need to protect wildlife and ecosystems is a positive step, but we must accelerate efforts to restore biodiversity for the health of our planet and future generations. And climate change imperils us all. We are therefore glad to see the commitment to accelerating action on climate change and scaling up finance for adaptation and prevention of loss and damage. However, these commitments are not compatible with new fossil fuel exploration, and we therefore urge all governments to halt any new oil, gas, or coal exploration. The future The future is in all of our hands. We have it in our collective power to reshape the world for our children and their children. It is essential that we do not go home empty-handed. When I go back home and see my young boys and hear the optimism in their voices, I want to be able to say that yes, the world is listening and change is coming. We cannot contemplate failure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ollie, for that powerful message. The future is in all of our hands. And Ollie also talked about the energy in civil society, and I want to hear the energy in this room now for a better future for all of us. Is there energy? Are we energized? Yes? Are we going to do it all together? Yes. Thank you very much, Ollie, for bringing us the civil society view there. We're grateful for your contributions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, day one of the Summit of the Future Action Day brought together young people from all over the world to discuss how we can all work together for a better future. And here now to reflect on yesterday's Youth-Led Action Day is Ms. Sumaya Agarwal, co-founder of the Youth for Peace International, which is an organization dedicated to fostering peace and understanding among youth globally. Sumaya, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, and fellow youth. Collectively, the world is significantly behind on the achievements set out in the Sustainable Development Goals and many other global frameworks. Today, young people make over 1/3 of the world's population, and youth are creating innovative and sustainable solutions to the problem we are currently facing. However, young people around the world are losing or have lost trust in our governance systems. And we must collectively decide to change our approach and reshape the path forward. We are so excited to start the Summit of the Future with the Youth Action Days. It's the first time in history that we have dedicated a Youth Day, and multi-stakeholders have shown genuine interest to learn and listen to us. Young people have been rigorously preparing for the Summit of the Future, and it was refreshing to see that the processes were co-designed and coordinated between UN agencies, youth constituencies, youth-led and youth-focused organizations. Let's see where we are, because these spaces are only meaningful when we commit to make a shift and learn. Yesterday was nothing less than inspiring. Youth voices were very loud and clear that they are watching the leaders, and the upcoming summit should not be just another international conference. Yesterday, young people, alongside policymakers and civil society, discussed key recommendations to ensure the implementation of the Pact for the Future and beyond. Let me share with you key takeaways that have been highlighted by the young people clustered under the 3 themes of today's Action Day. First, on inclusivity for peaceful futures, we need to collaborate with the national coalitions to advance the UNHCR 2050 on youth, peace, and security commitments and support the efforts of young people and youth-led organizations in the implementation. Allocate flexible, accessible, and sustainable financial support for adolescent-led, youth-focused organizations and networks, including for humanitarian action. Strengthen partnerships and dialogue between the youth-led organizations, policymakers, and humanitarian and development actors to ensure youth-driven solutions are recognized, scaled, and sustainable. Address the prevalence of climate and eco-anxiety among youth, which is contributing to a global mental health crisis. Usually we have seen the mental health support is neglected. Recommit to peace, youth protection, and human rights as youth are urging an immediate and permanent ceasefire in all conflict zones. For a digital future, explore potential strategies to mitigate growing digital risk and leverage digital opportunities to build an inclusive, safe, and meaningful digital futures for all. We also need to advocate for youth inclusion in digital and AI policy-making spaces, discuss current and future implications of emerging digital technologies with the focus on the consequences for young people, and explore mechanisms that protect the youth from digital harm. And finally, if we want to ensure sustainable futures, we have to take immediate actions to mitigate security risks and threats to building a peaceful world and sustainable societies. Establish national youth consultative bodies like youth advisory councils to ensure that young people and adolescents inform foreign and national policies. Young people must be part of policy making and decision-making processes and governance systems at various levels. Increase recognition and legitimization of youth efforts in traditional governance structures and facilitate a culture for meaningful youth participation. Young people also brought recommendations on gender yesterday, such as the need to revitalize the Commission on the Status of Women and the Commission on Population and Development in partnership with civil society and youth. Under the intergenerational equity and solidarity, youth and partners demand to create an intergenerational dialogue platform as well as to leverage science, data, statistics, and strategic foresight to ensure long-term thinking and planning in their governance structures. These are clear examples that young people need to be included across discussions, negotiations, and policies, because all matters are youth matters. Let me conclude by recalling the Secretary General's remark. During his dialogue with young people yesterday, he acknowledged that his generation prioritized profit in systems that ultimately failed us. This must be corrected. Our generation needs to be included in decision-making spaces and be meaningfully engaged in shaping those processes. The change needs to happen now, and youth lead for a better future. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Sumaya, for so eloquently summarizing your discussions and capturing the energy that we all felt yesterday on day one of the Summit of the Future Action Days. So this now concludes our first opening segment, and we'll now zero in on one of the summit's major targeted outcomes, and that is the Declaration on Future Generations, which will be a vital step forward in ensuring that the rights and interests of future generations are at the heart of global decision-making. To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome to the stage His Excellency Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, to join us. Thank you.
Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency António Guterres, Excellencies and distinguished delegates, representatives of the United Nations, civil society, youth, major groups, and other stakeholders. It is a distinct honor to join you this morning in building momentum towards the Summit of the Future, and to formally commence the discussions on future generations. Allow me to congratulate and commend all of you for your tremendous efforts over these past few years to ensure the success of the summit. Jamaica is proud to have co-facilitated the intergovernmental process for the Declaration on Future Generations, and I take this opportunity to express my appreciation to our co-facilitator, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, for their excellent collaboration during this challenging process. I would also like to thank the Secretary General and his team for the support provided to our respective teams during the negotiations and consultations. The inclusivity of the Summit of the Future and its preceding action days, as well as the preparatory processes leading up to this very critical moment, is truly symbolic of the approach that is required to preserve a robust and effective multilateral system with the United Nations at its core. It is clear that member states and the UN system cannot chart this path alone. We must leverage the knowledge, expertise, and vigor of civil society, youth, academia, the private sector, and other stakeholders to deliver a better future for this planet and for all its people. The Declaration on Future Generations has certainly benefited from this coming together of great minds and reflects the diverse perspectives and challenges across the world that must be taken into account as we lay the foundation for the next century and beyond. Indeed, with the adoption of this declaration at the summit tomorrow, we will be able to celebrate a universal realization that even as we address the challenges of today, we have an obligation to protect the interests of future generations and ensure that they will inherit a planet in which they can thrive. We must now translate that enthusiasm into action by giving life to the declaration. We are grateful that during the consultations, all stakeholders recognized that it was important to not only manifest lofty intent to take account of the needs of future generations, but to agree to fundamental guiding principles, make far-reaching commitments, and prescribe concrete actions to propel us to achieve this end. Having completed the negotiations, it is now our responsibility to ensure effective implementation of the Pact for the Future, the Global Digital Compact, and the Declaration on Future Generations. For governments like mine, this effort will require a whole-of-society collaboration as we seek to embed futures thinking in all our decision-making processes across national and local government. The role of civil society, academia, and the private sector in this endeavor will be critical in developing solutions, as well as building and maintaining momentum towards implementation. In Jamaica, my government has already begun to invest in anticipatory planning and future-proofing, recognizing first and foremost that a solid macroeconomic foundation is the most basic requirement. We have lowered our debt to GDP ratio, increased our foreign exchange reserves, reduced our unemployment rate, and achieved single-digit inflation as well as financial sector stability. This has allowed us to increase investment in sustainable and smart infrastructure, building for the future while taking account of changing demographic trends. We are, however, well aware of the capacity limitations of developing states to deal with the multidimensional challenges we currently face: climate change, debt sustainability, economic stability, access to financing for development, global shocks, among others. Technology and knowledge transfer must therefore be facilitated, including through mutually agreed arrangements. The international financial institutions must be reformed to provide the necessary access to financing as the means of implementation. The multilateral system, with the UN at its core, must be equipped to provide opportunities for developing and sharing best practices. In this regard, a follow-up mechanism will also be important, so that implementation of commitments we make over the next few days can be appropriately measured and monitored. Excellencies, with the adoption of the Pact and its annexes, we have charted a path and made the first bold steps. Let us now move forward with hope and determination to ensure that our collective legacy will be a peaceful, healthy, and prosperous planet for all our peoples and a sustainable future for the generations to come. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your remarks and for your powerful message. We have to translate our engagement into action, as you say. It now gives me great pleasure to welcome the first female Prime Minister of Aruba, Her Excellency Evelyn Weaver-Crose.
Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm delighted to be here with you all today on this inspiring occasion to take part in the discussion and to listen to your valuable insights. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is proud to have co-facilitated the intergovernmental process for a declaration on future generations alongside Jamaica. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, for his unwavering commitment and collaboration throughout this process. The declaration represents a significant milestone, and it will be annexed to the Pact for the Future during the Summit of the Future, an event that provides a rare, once-in-a-generation opportunity to create lasting change. This summit is our chance to set things right, not only for the people of today, young and old, but for the generations yet to come. Our decisions and our actions send ripple effects across time, shaping the future. By making thoughtful and responsible choices now, we ensure a positive intergenerational impact benefiting those who will inherit this world. The declaration has the potential to mark a pivotal moment in our multilateral efforts to address global crises and to establish a robust framework for long-term sustainable development. By embracing strategic foresight and carefully considering the long-term effects of our decisions, we can pave the way for a more equitable and sustainable world for future generations. It is essential that we demonstrate intergenerational solidarity. Challenges such as inequality and discrimination, climate change, food insecurity, the digital divide, and ongoing conflicts are human-made. They demand collective solutions. It is our collective responsibility to champion impactful and long-lasting solutions. Governments, policymakers, and all stakeholders must work together to turn legal and policy decisions into a unified intergenerational agenda that safeguards the interests of future generations. The declaration promises to bring about a major shift in how we think, making sure that caring for future generations and sharing responsibility across generations are priorities in our decisions. This is especially important when it comes to climate change. Like many countries around the world, my country, Aruba, and indeed our entire kingdom, which spans 2 continents, is facing the consequences of global warming. Rising sea levels and more extreme weather events clearly show us how what we do or don't do affects everyone, now and in the future. The devastating hurricanes and floods in our Caribbean region are a stark reminder of this reality. Yet, history teaches us that forward-thinking decisions can protect future generations. By learning from past mistakes and taking decisive action today, we will secure long-term benefits for ourselves and for those to come after us. And this is why I look to the future with what I call realistic optimism. But there is a catch. We need to act now, and we must act collectively. civil society partners, research institutions, the private sector, and so many others gathered here today all have an essential role to play. By supporting governments, policymakers, and international organizations like the United Nations, we can steer decisions towards this common goal, a thriving legacy for future generations. Today is the International Day of Peace, which was designated by the General Assembly as a time of nonviolence and ceasefire. Unfortunately, today is not a day without conflict, as the violence in the Middle East, Sudan, and Ukraine shows. While solving these conflicts is beyond what we can expect to achieve today, that doesn't mean we should stop working towards a better future. And that is why I'm honored to be here today with you. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, I would like to extend my sincere thank you to the Secretary General of the United Nations for his forward-thinking vision in prioritizing future generations and entrusting us with the responsibility of advancing the Declaration. His leadership has helped make the concept of future generations more tangible. Additionally, I want to express my gratitude to all the stakeholders here today: civil society, academia, the private sector, and impact coalitions, for your active participation over the past 2 years. Your dedication has been critical in shaping this process. With a declaration on future generations, we must strive as good ancestors to leave behind a world that offers a better quality of life for those who follow. I look forward to continuing this journey together, shaping a more inclusive and just future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister, and thank you as well to the Prime Minister of Jamaica for your efforts in ensuring the interests of future generations remains at the top of the global agenda. We're getting things set up now for our panel discussion. We'll be joined by a panel of experts working on the topic of future generations, moderated by Thomas Hale, who is a professor of global public policy in the Blavatnik School of Government at the University of Oxford. Thomas's work has focused on precisely the issue of how we safeguard our future and address the subject of what he terms long problems. Professor Hale will be joined by 3 distinguished panelists. Our first panelist is Hinna Jilani, a pioneering lawyer and human rights defender and a member of the Elders, an esteemed group of global leaders. Ms. Jilani will be joined by Abdullahi Alim, the CEO of the Africa Future Fund, which is a new financing mechanism to advance the rights and prosperity of future Africans. And to round out our panel, we have Paulo Baca, the Deputy Director of De Justicia. Dr. De Baca's work blends academic scholarship with public engagement, and his extensive fieldwork has fostered collaborations with indigenous organizations worldwide. So we're honored to have these experts join us at the General Assembly today to provide their diverse perspectives on the Declaration of Future Generations. And I will turn it over now to Professor Hale and his panelists.
Thank you very much, Foley, for this kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow, every member state of the United Nations will adopt a declaration on future generations, thanks to the hard work of many people in this room and a few late hours last night. This is a potentially transformative document, but as we've just heard from these speakers, the potential of any document to transform our world depends entirely on what happens next, what action follows from the text. And we have a fantastic panel today to talk about the work they're doing to advance the goals and the objectives that the Declaration speaks to. And I'm going to be asking them, what is the potential transformative potential of this document, and how do we unlock it? And those are important questions because we are facing a world, this document is arriving in a world that is fraught. We face war, we face debt, we face a climate crisis, we face the lingering effects of a global pandemic, we face many immediate challenges. And so why now? Why in September 2024 are we talking about future generations? And the document answers that critical question in two ways. First, it recognizes the fundamental connection between the immediate, urgent challenges we face and the long-term trends and drivers from which they grow. It understands that things like climate change, poverty, underdevelopment, lack of health, lack of justice are fundamental risk factors that create crises. And as we all saw in our own lives just a few years ago, when a crisis gets out of control, we can't react our way out of it. We can't respond only. We need to anticipate and act in advance. And that's a fundamental shift consistent with the goals of the United Nations to advance sustainable development. Second, the document, and I think this is really striking and important, it recognizes a fundamental consensus across cultures, across religions, across philosophies, across value systems, that we all have an interest and indeed a responsibility to think about the future, to think about leaving a better world for those that come after us. And in a world where consensus is sorely lacking, isn't it helpful, isn't it powerful to think about the powerful consensus that exists there? Now, of course, these kinds of lofty words fall flat. They ring hollow without action to follow up. And so we're going to hear from a panel thinking about what that action looks like. But of course, we see already trends happening around the world that are driving forward action to support future generations. Just this week, the European Union appointed a commissioner with responsibility for intergenerational fairness. This month, the South Korean Constitutional Court ordered the government to enhance its climate targets to better serve future generations. This is actually happening on the ground everywhere. And so the real question for this declaration is how it can catalyze more such changes going forward. Abdullahi, I'd like to start with you. You're the CEO of the Africa Future Fund, working to support leaders and transformative businesses to solve the continent's greatest challenges. You've also worked at the International Chamber of Commerce, so you know what the private sector thinks. And you've just done a survey of a number of private sector leaders across Africa, asking them, what do you think about future generations? What did they say?
So yes, my name is Abdullahi Alim, and I'm currently leading an outfit called the Africa Future Fund. I'm no longer with the International Chamber of Commerce, so just a quick mention to the technical team. 1 billion Africans will be born in the next generation alone, and I think by the close of this century, you can expect about 3 to 4 billion total more Africans to be born. When you think of the mega cities of the future, it'll be cities like Lagos, cities like Dar es Salaam, cities like Mogadishu, where I was born. And for some context, Mogadishu alone, by the end of this century, will be more populous than the entire country of Spain. Just to give you some scope of where the world and where the trajectory of population growth is growing. So from my perspective, when I think future generations, to make it as specific as possible, from my vantage point, I'm talking about future Africans. If this rapid growth in population that we're expecting over the next few decades isn't also met with commensurate increases in like industrialization, in living standards, of course, without clocking past ecological boundaries, then we will have yet another wasted generation. And it's from this place that we created the Africa Future Fund. We're trying to take big bets on our communities. We're trying to channel big investments to seismically change the geopolitical and economic might of the continent over the next few decades. What does that look like? It looks, for example, like backing a local African initiative that is studying, that is most importantly IPing active compounds that are found in plant life that are indigenous to the Congolese basin, these kind of active compounds will be critical to the modern genomic revolution and to some of the anti-cancer treatments of the future. It's about backing, for example, fellowships that bring together young Africans at the forefront of combating advanced disinformation warfare. There's one particular form, if anybody's interested in like the future of disinformation, called adversarial AI. We wrote a piece for them, about them rather, for foreign policy. And so some of the foremost thinkers on this topic are actually from the continent. So unlike what you normally see where it's European, US, or advanced Asian economies leading the world on thought and sort of exporting it to sub-Saharan Africa, we want to get to a stage where we're leading and setting the standard for global resilience in this case. And, you know, to be also honest, it's also about backing young, progressive political voices on the continent, training them on what the future looks like, so that they're able to really rise to the occasion when they assume positions of influence, positions of power. As Thomas alluded to, we ran a massive consultation across the continent to figure out what does the future look like, what's the significance of it to your work. If you are, for example, the head of a sovereign wealth fund, if you are a former head of state, if you are a young entrepreneur, 3 main priorities that made it very, very practical for us. It's about restructuring the way debt is measured on the continent. Unlike anywhere else in the world, the majority of the debt in Africa is actually owned by the private sector. And it's 4 times more expensive to borrow debt on the continent than anywhere else in the world. Number 1, reforming debt. The second one is around really advancing export-oriented industrial policy. It makes no sense that, for example, Côte d'Ivoire, the largest producer of cashew nuts, makes a very limited gain in the global supply chain relative to countries like Vietnam, relative to countries like India. And the third one is really about taking more potential out from our SMEs. And we have this concept known as search funds, which we're also championing. Three key ideas that came when we spoke to CEOs, when we spoke to government leaders, young entrepreneurs, and I'll go into a bit more detail later on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for highlighting the opportunity that thinking about the future can highlight. We often think about the risks and how we manage them, but actually we need to have a real laser focus on the opportunity side as well. Paulo, I'll come to you next if I may. You work for De Justicia, which is a fantastic group of researchers and advocates working across a range of issues, but many people here will have heard about a famous case that you won in which a group of youth and children successfully sued the government in Colombia's highest court for action to prevent deforestation in the Amazon because of the impacts of that would have on climate change and the climate future generations will inherit. So how do you think about this question of future generations in your own work, and is there more potential to unlock that kind of transformation going forward?
Thank you, Tom. I will start on the issue how future generations' perspective have changed my mind, and later on I will talk about the Justicia's case. I have been working with indigenous peoples for over 2 decades, and I have learned from Andean communities from Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru that the issue on future generations have to be tackled from a temporality perspective. For Andean indigenous peoples, the time is not linear or chronological. It happens in Western cultures. For them, for example, the future is behind us, and the past is in front. And that is why women carry on their kids, their children, on the back, because children are the future. And the past is in front because in front they find the wisdom of the elders. And the wisdom of the elders are the meanings that can drive the present of our daily lives. So in indigenous cosmologies, the future is not something that will come. It's something that it is linked with past and present. And it changed everything, because for them, there is no separation between nature and culture. They think and they belong to the mountains, they belong to the lakes, and their own laws belong to that sources of the land. And it changed, you know, the perspective about human rights of an international law, for example. And using this kind of framework, the Justicia sued to the Colombian state because deforestation was increasing in the Amazon region. And we use the concept of future generations in order to stop deforestation. And the Supreme Court ordered an intergenerational pact to stop deforestation in the Amazon region. Nevertheless, after 6 years of this important ruling, the implementation in a way has been a failure, at least in terms of this intergenerational pact. On the one hand, because it is necessary to build mechanisms to drive interjurisdictional models between the Colombian states and the indigenous Amazonian peoples. And it has been difficult, so we need to work together to put forward the voice of indigenous peoples in their own terms to understand how future generation pacts should work. And on the other hand, the armed conflict, it is still an issue in Colombia. And unfortunately, the conflict is still going on in the Amazon region, and it had put some difficulties to implement the pact and to stop deforestation. So unfortunately, deforestation is increasing, and we don't have the intergenerational pact.
I think it's a really important example for us to think about, a really innovative case of using law to take indigenous thinking into the heart of modern governance, and then the challenge, the ongoing challenge of trying to deliver that, requiring a deeper transformation of governance systems. So, like for many of the things we're thinking about around future generations, a step forward, but then many more steps to come, and a long-term perspective needed to drive the fundamental transformation. Mr. Lani, can I turn next to you? You are a pioneering lawyer. You were the first, you founded the first all-woman law firm in Pakistan. You've represented the UN as a special representative for human rights defenders. You're working currently with the elders. You've seen these issues change over time, but you've also been at the forefront of that change. And yesterday, you and the other elders issued an intergenerational call to action. So how does the Future Generations Declaration, which we're coming to tomorrow, influence the work that you're doing?
Thank you, Thomas, for that question. Let me say, first of all, that when we talk about a declaration on future generations, what springs to my mind immediately is Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which essentially says that every human being is endowed with reason and conscience. If that belief is true, then I see no reason for hesitation on the implementation of any of the agreed principles and implementation strategies that the Declaration says. If there is hesitation on the part of those that are making decisions and policies that affect the lives of their own people and the global environment, I would regretfully have to say that this belief that all human beings are endowed with reason and a conscience is going to be confounded. I also believe that the transformation that we are talking about and our aspiration to bring about that transformation is really rooted in the respect for human rights, in the recognition that only a rule-based order can propel that change, and be able to achieve what are the crises and critical areas of concern to us today. You've spoken about climate change and its effects. I come from a country which is one of the top 10 countries to be affected by climate change. So the effects of climate change for people like me are not in the abstract. They are not just a technical issue for us to deal with, or an academic, are not of academic concern. We see things happening to people where displacement, loss of livelihood, loss of life in many cases is so real and is affecting so many of the vulnerable communities. Paulo speaks of indigenous communities. I have seen people who have traditionally been inhabitants of land for centuries having to leave that land, having to leave that way of life because of climate change. We all know what the COVID pandemic did to us and how it has changed our lives. So I do believe that if there is reason, if there is a conscience, and if there is a will to preserve the environment in which we live and to develop the consensus to bring about an environment in the world where dialogue is possible, where it's important to understand the values of diversity rather than that becoming the reason for division, where intolerance is totally rejected, where people not only talk about tolerating others, but have a belief that tolerance will be replaced by accommodation of everyone's belief, everyone's culture, everyone's needs. So these are some of the things that I look forward to, and I think the civil society has a very critical role to play, because these are the people who can not take on governments, but at least create a balance in the power of the state and the voices of the people. And one of my colleagues, one of the other elders, President Santos from your country, said yesterday that governments understand pressure. The civil society can build that pressure.
An important source of action, not just in the world at all, but also for this declaration, which is, as I think the speakers before highlighted, benefited from some of that pressure and ideas. And I love how you've connected, Mr. Lani, the declaration coming tomorrow to the long history and the fundamental human rights that's at the center of the multilateral system, and how this is an extension and a deepening and a recognition of how that understanding must evolve as we face problems like climate change and other things that last generation to generation. I want to come back to the panel with a burning point, which is going back to this idea of how do we unlock the transformation? How do we make this text come to life? How do we breathe life into it, as the Secretary General said? I'm curious what the one action you would like governments to take next. They're going to sign this thing tomorrow, agree the thing. What should they do the day after? What should they make their top priority? I think there's many, many ones, but what's one you would like to see them take forward? I wonder, Abdullah, if I could come back to you first.
So I think for me, is it just one?
Just your top one.
Okay. I would say focus on, for me, it's always an economic conversation, to be honest. Because if your population is going to double, if it's going to triple, you're almost planning for a new country over the next few decades. So think about which sectors are you most competitive and hone in your entire government strategy based on that. That sounds very simple, but it's actually somewhat difficult to do. Again, I'll go back to the example of the cashew nut trade in West Africa. I spoke to a young entrepreneur who told me, you know, I export my raw cashew nuts, let's say, I'm just going to give a hypothetical number, let's say $1 a kilo. He then sells it to somebody based in another part of the world who has machinery that is able to roast that is able to salt at scale these nuts and then sell it for $10. So this person has already lost $9 because they just happen to be based in a part of the world that lacks industrial capacity. So for me, it's a case where I think each government needs to come to terms with the fact that focus on 2 or 3 critical sectors where you think you have growth opportunities. Make sure your roads and transportation authority, your investment authority, your everybody needs to be focused on that one competitive sector. Because ultimately, to protect future generations, you're going to need money. You're going to need capital, because it's going to require a lot of infrastructure.
And I think your comment is particularly trenchant given the current debt burden that so many future majority countries hold. And so it's not even about building for the future, it's also about getting the legacy of the past righted in that sense.
If you were to give, sorry, I'm going to be very cheeky. If you were to give a loan to any business anywhere in the world, can I tell you which region in the world you'll most likely recover your loan is from? It's Sub-Saharan Africa at #1. More so than Europe, more so than Latin America, more so than South Asia. The #1 region in the world for loan recovery when it comes to lending to the private sector is Sub-Saharan Africa.
A fantastic opportunity.
Still very expensive.
Fantastic opportunity. The opportunity is really shining through in this future generations narrative. Paolo, what's the one action you would like to see taken?
Well, I think that it is very important to make a bridge between the local and the global. I think that countries such as Pakistan or Colombia are suffering the consequences of the climate crisis, but we are not the ones who produce the crisis. So I think that it is important that the wealthier countries, the ones who are producing global warming, acknowledge that. And that acknowledgement are connected with the past of, for example, colonial history, racial structural discrimination, and of course it is also connected with the generations to come to build a better future for everyone. So I think that we need to move forward from these global forums which are very important, of course, and go also to the local communities and try to understand these kind of discussions from their point of view. Right. So it is very important, to engage, for example, with peasants, with Afro-descendants, with indigenous peoples, who with these sectors who have the knowledge to stop the climate crisis, because they have the biocultural knowledge, for example, in the Amazon, to make a sustainable development for future generations, and be more open as they have been with us, because they have, have the skills to go, for example, to the courts, to the United Nations.
Indeed, and your work shows exactly the potential of that, right? Your work shows how to do that, which I think is so important, because I think many people will say, okay, that's a really good idea, but how do we do it? And you've given us a model, right, in this case, that is a work in progress, as you said very clearly, but is a good starting point. So this is a really, I think, practical way forward that you're articulating. Mr. Lani, your top wish to see after governments sign the Declaration on Future Generations?
Can I just, if you allow me, add to something that Paolo has just said? Look, as a human rights defender, I have always criticized government's failure to take care of climate consequences and extreme emergencies that happen. But there are times when I pity our governments, because even where there is willingness, the ability to respond is not there. So I do think that that globally, we, countries who have almost no carbon footprint, have to be compensated. We have to have enough resources for adaptation, for mitigation, and to respond to the people's loss of livelihood and other issues that emerge. But coming to your question now, I think my top priority apart from many others that compete with this one, is governments must ensure that they have a plan to develop communities that demonstrate the power of social connection. One thing I can say as an elder, we may be called the elders, but we don't think that we are a repository of all wisdom. We have a plan and a policy, and a commitment to seeking out the pockets of wisdom where they exist and learning from those. And one of the important things that the elders totally believe in and have a faith in is this intergenerational connection. I think this kind of social connection is critical to ending loneliness, to ending social isolation, bringing about people's ability to reach out to each other, learn from each other, and in that context also to inform the global environment on what the essential needs are all the time. I'm not going to enumerate all the problems that we have today, but let me say, through this whole policy of social connection, ending isolation, ending loneliness, which is not just a public health issue, it's an issue of governance, really.
Yeah.
By doing that, we can fix it.
Yeah. Well, I think your comments remind me very much of the philosopher Edmund Burke, who said, describe society as a pact between the past, the present, and the future. And that is indeed what this declaration is recognizing, and what the fantastic work you each have described is aiming to give life to put meaning into those ideas and principles, whether it be economic issues, whether it be the incorporation of indigenous ideas to protect the environment, whether it be fundamental human rights protections. And of course, that's a perfect framing for our discussions for the rest of today, where we'll have numerous sessions looking at how we take forward the ideas in the pact and overall, and how the Declaration on Future Generations can best be implemented. And I think there's a final point to add to those discussions. You said it very well, Mr. Lani. Governments don't always have the capacities, right, to deliver on these things. And so a key question for us today is, what more do we want the multilateral system to be doing to support us, to support governments to deliver on the pact? For example, in the declaration text, there's an upcoming forum to check in on progress. There's a report. There's a noting of the Secretary General's proposal to appoint a special envoy for future generations. What more support should the multilateral system provide to take forward these ideas is another key part of our discussions today. In conclusion, please join me in thanking our extraordinary panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hill. Thank you. That was such a great discussion, great conversation. Thank you all very much for your time here today. A fascinating discussion moderated by Professor Hill. Thank you very much. It's so inspiring to hear unique voices across sectors and generations who remind us that we all have a role to play in building this future together. With that, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, we end our opening ceremony. Before leaving, however, we want to show you a summary of the discussions this morning that our visual scribe has been working on diligently in the background, summing up, as you can see there, the main themes addressed this morning. Look at it, isn't it great? Please, a round of applause for our visual scribe. Now, as Professor Hale mentioned, our discussions will continue throughout the day and throughout the building, so please make your way now to the other sessions, the main sessions. In Conference Room 4, the sessions on a sustainable future for all will focus on key action areas of sustainable development and financing for development that will deliver on the aspirations of the 2030 Agenda. In the trusteeship chamber, the Peaceful Future for All session, which will focus on intergenerational dialogue for peace. And in ECOSOC chamber, join us for a Digital Future for All sessions, which will bring forward looking commitments from all stakeholders to harness innovation, science, and data in a more inclusive, safe, and sustainable manner. And of course, don't forget to join us for the closing ceremony, everyone, at 5:30 p.m. in EcoSoc as well, where we'll share our learnings from the day's interactive and thought-provoking sessions and look towards the next steps in creating our shared future. Thank you all very much. I'll kindly ask you to please quickly leave the room because we have another session in place, and continue your conversations outside and in the other rooms, EcoSoc Chamber, and the different sessions that we're having this morning. Thank you all very much. I wish you an excellent day and see you at 5:30 for our closing ceremony. Thank you very much.